All right, let's begin. We're continuing where we left off, explaining the blessing that Bilam gave to the Jewish people. And he said, who can count the Rova B'nai Israel? Who can count 1/4 of the Jewish people? Or maybe it means the 4 times the Jewish people, which doesn't seem to make any sense on face value. So there's a lot of different explanations what this word means, Rova. But the first Rebbe of Chabad, he takes 2 of them. And they're very spiritual, deep reasons, but it's not really spiritual. It's very actual. And namely, that the Jewish people, by means of doing the commandments, they create the world, and they bring the purpose of the creation into the world. In other words, they reveal the creator in the creation. So the Rebbe says, how does that hinted at the word Rova, number 4, fourth? He says, because the creation can be divided a lot of different ways, but one of the ways we can divide it is in what's called the 3 different worlds, the dimensions of reality, each one more real than the one below it. The most real in creation is called the world of creation. It's called the world of Bria. That's pure creation. You can see and feel as a creator, something like the first man, right? The first man, when he was created, that he knew that he didn't have a mother and father. He knew that he was just created from absolute nothingness. He came into a world, the world was already. He didn't make it. He didn't enliven it. He didn't create himself. He didn't enliven himself. There was no way that he could say that he was a product of any natural process. The first man, Adam. But nevertheless, he did have free will and etc. And that's why he ate the tree. But nevertheless, he knew and felt God, Adam. And his job was supposed to be to make more godliness in the world. So the same thing is also the world of Bria. The world of Bria is called the world of creation. It's just created. It feels in the world of creation. Another name for this world of creation is, what's this? What did I do? I did something. Is the upper heaven, Gan Eden Elyon. This is like a really pure revelation of godliness, much, much higher than the revelation which is below. Sometimes it's called the world of the angel, of the souls, which are above the angels. The angels, it's a lower dimension. That's in the world of Yetzirah. And then there's this world of Asiyah. So that's 3 different levels: Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. And he said this corresponds also to God's thought, God's speech, God's action. Remember, I'm just reviewing what we learned. So, but then there's a 4th level, and that's hinted at in this pasuk, this sentence from Isaiah, that says that everything there is in the world, I created it, I formed it, and I made it. That's talking about created. That's talking about this world of Bria. I formed it. That's the world of Yetzirah, the world of the angels. And also I made it. Asisiv also made it. This thing of made it, that's the lowest world here. And this world also, the word also, hints at a 4th level. And that is achieved when a Jew, from his own free will, decides that he is going to defy nature and connect himself to the Creator. Because these 3 levels we talked about before, this is all nature. And it's true that in the upper levels you can feel God a little bit, but you have no idea what it is. The 4th level, this level, is actually pure godliness. The commandments are God embodied. That's the commandments. The 613 laws of the Torah, it says that's the body of God. 248 limbs, 365 blood vessels. So when a Jew does the commandments in this world, that's something totally out of this world. That's something the Creator, but it's in this world. God, you bring it into the world. That's his 4th level. He says that's also hinted at what it says in the prophecy. It says the Jews will be like the number of the Jews will be like the sand on the sea that has no number. So the Gemara says, does it have a number? It doesn't. It says the number of the Jews will be like the sand in the sea, which, I mean, theoretically you could count. And then it says, but it can't be counted. So if it can't be counted, then it's not like the sand. The sentence should have said, the Jews will be even more than the sand of the sea. They cannot be, but that's not what it says. It says it will be like the sand of the sea. That's what their numbers will be. That it has no number. So the Gemara says, what's going on? The sentence is contradicting itself. And the Gemara answers, when the Jews do the will of God, then they can't be counted. When they don't do the will of God, then they're like the sand of the sea. He says, what does it mean? This is, the Rebbe said, I'm summarizing what we said yesterday. Let's look at the sand in the sea. What happens? Why is there sand next to the sea? I mean, it should be all muddy. He says, no, because the sea, it's very close, but it's separate. It's separate. It doesn't seep in to the sand. So therefore, the sand remains dry. The sea takes out, so to speak, all the dampness. Well, the same thing with the world. The world is really made from God, but God purposely sort of removed his godliness from the world. So the world is right next to God, metaphorically speaking. But on the other hand, it's all dry. So it says that's because of the Jewish people. The Jewish people, they're the ones that make the separation. But on the other hand, the separation is a good thing, right? Because God wants there to be a world. And the Jewish people, but at the same time, the Jewish people also reveal the creator in the creation. That's what it means that it can't be counted. This is something like what is going to be in the future. There's going to be raising of dead. There will be a world, and all the details of the world will be here. And every person will be himself with his own personality, but he won't have any bad aspects of personality. There won't be any more murder and depression and confusion. Even death eventually there won't be. The world can get along really good with all these things. When these negative things are all gone, then, or transformed, then it says that the world will really reveal godliness, something like it was in the Holy Temple. Right? In the Holy Temple, there was, in the Holy of Holies, there was the ark where the tablets were, and the ark had very definite measurements. It was a very exact measurements. It had to have these measurements or it was disqualified. And nevertheless, at the same time, it says that it could not be measured. It could not be measured. The people would go down there once a year to clean the place out. They would be lowered down. And if you would measure from one end, let's say they wanted to measure to see it was exactly the right place. So it says that from one end of this ark to the wall was, let's say, 10 amas. And from the other end of the wall was 10 amas. And the ark itself was 2.5 amas. So if so, you add the whole thing up, it must be that the whole room was 22.5 amas wide. It says, no, it wasn't. When you measured the room was only 20 amas. So what does it mean? The ark took up place, right? It had to be exact measurements, yes. And from one end of the ark to the wall, there was 10. From the other end, there was 10. So you must have miscalculated. I mean, so no, the room has to be exactly 20, and that's exactly what there is. And from one end of the ark to the wall is 10, and the other end is 10. So the ark, is it there or is it not there? The answer is yes. It's there and it's not there at the same time. So it says that's what it means. Because it's doing the will of God, so to speak, it's not there. It takes up no number. You can't count it. You can't measure it. On the other hand, it's God's will. It wants to be measured. This is that's what the Jewish people are. They're like the sea. Let me just close this thing over here. Okay. Now let us continue learning this beautiful Mama. Okay. Hine, Kasiv, it is written, Vahaya Mispar ben Israel. It says that there's the number of the Jewish people. Hine, Kasiv, it is written, Vahaya Mispar ben Israel, that the number of the Jewish people, so the number of the Jewish people will be like the sand on the sea. Shebnei Israel heim osim bechinat mispar. The Jewish people, they're the ones that cause this we call the numbers, separateness. So they're the ones that draw down God's power of kingship, or in the Torah it's called God's speech. Liot malchut malchut kolamim, that God's kingship, which is the power of the creators, the power of the creator to create. In the Torah, like I said, it's called God speaking. And for it to come out and to create the worlds. Now, of course, nothing comes out of God, but it makes it seem like it's coming out. So the Jewish people, they're the ones that actually make the world a world, namely al yadei, by means of mitzvahs, by means of doing the commandments, that they're called the commandments of the king. And therefore, therefore we say, before every commandment, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you, God, our God, the King of the world. We make God a king of the world. And that by means of the commandments, that's the reason that God is creating the world. Shehu amshachas oren sof, this draws down godliness, liot melech ha'olam, that God becomes the king of the world. Kamosh katuv, like it says in another place. So who would believe it? But it's true. By means of the Jewish people doing the commandments, this is what keeps the whole entire world going. We're talking about how many people are in the world? 8 billion, 9 billion people in the world. Each one is different from the other. There's all these animals and bugs, and that's only the physical world. What about all the angels, all these upper spiritual worlds? It all is being created due to the Jewish people doing the commandments. Like we said in another place. So of the worlds, they seem to be separate from God. That's what we call there's the Jewish people make the number. They make it the separateness. The fi shehi hamshachat or sof, because this draws down godliness. Therefore, ein rak begeter mispar. But on the other hand, because we're talking about who's creating the world, God is creating the world. He's creating the world due to our commandments. But because this is godliness, and God is creating the world from what? From nothing. So therefore, really, you can't count it. There are no individual creations. Billions of people and billions of bugs and angels. The eno mispar mamish is not really a number. Like we said about the ark in the Holy of Holies. Is it there or is it not there? It's exactly 2.5 amas long. Right? It's 2.5 amas long, and it should have, it was measured before you put it in. It had to be made exactly measurements. Can you be measured? Of course it can be measured. But as soon as you measured the whole room, you saw it didn't take up any place. So does it have a number? It doesn't have a number. So we say, not really. It doesn't really have a number. It's a thing, but not like anything else. The same thing as the world. The whole world really is something like the Holy of Holies. God is creating it all the time, and he's creating it from nothing. That includes me and you. So do we exist? Of course we exist. God creates us. But on the other hand, our existence is just totally dependent on nothing. God is bringing us constantly from nothing to be something. And we don't even know what nothing is. Nothing is not a vacuum. It's not the empty space between, the planets or whatever it is. That's something. The empty space is space. It's space. It takes time to travel. That's a creation. That's a something already. So what is nothing? What does it mean, nothing? We have no idea what it means, nothing. But nevertheless, that's really what we're made of, nothing. And it's a big miracle that God is bringing us out every single instant from nothing to something. That's what it means, that we are not, it can't be counted. The Jewish people will be counted like the sand on the sea, and they can't count it. They can't be counted. When they do the will of God, when they draw down the upper will of God, but my mitzvah isn't doing the commandments. Because the commandments are or ein sof. This is the light of God. Hainu al yadei simcha shel mitzvah, like we talked about before. When a Jew, the reality of what we're doing when we do a commandment, the reality of it seeps in, then there's a joy. You're doing something that's infinitely meaningful. Infinitely meaningful. Like we said, it's like the ark. The ark held the tablets. The tablets were the most valuable thing in the world. That's the whole foundation of the world is the Torah. Without the Torah, the whole world is just chaos, total chaos, which we can see examples of. Without the Torah, the whole world doesn't even exist. So the Torah is very important, right? It says, yeah, of course, there's certain measurements to the tablets, and they were perfectly square. The Rebbe brings all the Talmud, all opinions that the tablets were square, and that they were put in a bond, and then this ark, and the ark had to be made exactly right, and there was the three boxes, one inside of the other, and how big they were, and this exact measurements, and it didn't have any measurement. You couldn't measure it. I mean, it's the most important thing in the world for sure. That must have a measurement, right? He says, no, it didn't. It did on its own, but when it was in as soon as you tried to measure it in relation to anything else, it didn't have any measurement. This is, that's pure godliness. On one hand, God makes the world, but you have to remember, he makes the world from nothing. The world is a big miracle, but it's here, right? He says, yes, it's here, but it's not here as a separate entity. It's here as a miracle. So that's what it means. Who causes this miracle to be that this is? So it says that's the Jewish people. When the Jewish people serve God from the inside of their heart, then they themselves become uncountable. Like it says, it says that the commandments of God, they make you happy. So in order to be happy, you have to be a person. You have to be something, right? You have to be, you have to receive something to be happy. It says, yes, when a Jew really does a commandment and he realizes what the commandment is, and he realizes that he's really linking up to the essence of God, and he's the one that's causing the world to be created, that makes you very happy. If you don't realize it, then it doesn't make you happy. It's like a poor person on the street, and he's scrounging around for money, and someone comes along and gives him a check for $1 million, but he doesn't know what a check is. He doesn't have it, right? He's about to blow his nose in it or something and throw it away. And the person giving it to us says, no, this is very valuable. You believe me? Do you look at me? Do you believe me? I don't believe you. It says, here, look, gives him $100. It says, this $100 that I'm giving you, what you have in your hand, right? That's 10,000 times more than this $100. Want another 100? Here's another 100. Wow, maybe this man is telling me the truth. He starts to, as soon as he realizes what the check is and that it has money and what it means, money, having so much money, he's very happy. Right? This is wonderful, instead of scrounging around in garbage cans, unless he enjoys scrounging around in garbage cans. In which case, if he really enjoys it, he'll put the money in the bank and he'll continue scrounging around in garbage cans. There's people like that. In fact, I knew there are people that they enjoy begging. They enjoy begging, but that's not a life. The same thing is also with us. We're getting used to the exile. But the fact of the matter is that we're millionaires, we're billionaires. We have the Torah, we have the commandments. That should make us very happy. Like it says, Tachat asher lo avadat et Hashem Elokecha b'simcha b'tuv levav. Avadat et Hashem b'simcha b'tuv levav mirov kol. We did this yesterday. When you do a commandment, it should be that you're happier, right? It should make you happier than the great abundance. Rov kol says, what is this idea of great abundance? Hainu bli gvul, unlimited. Lamaila ad ein kates, lamata ad ein tachlis. Talked about this yesterday. And that when you do a commandment, that should make you tremendously happy if you just think about what you are doing. V'zeu et Rov Yisrael. That's what it means. The fourth level, chelek hadalid, the fourth level of the Jews, 1/4. Shubichin is af asisiv. That's this level of af. Also, I made it. So there's God's thought, that makes the world of Bria. The word God's speech, that makes the world of Yetzirah, where the angels are. God's deed, that makes this physical world. But there's, before God's deed, there's this other word, af, and that indicates using the physical world to serve God. That's higher. That's a fourth level. Who gilui ratzon. This reveals the will of God specifically. That's that, and it can only be done in this world. Gam, also Rava from Lashon Arba. Here we said that's a fourth level. Here we're talking about 4 times as much. This fourth level that you draw down, of godliness in the world, it's another level, right? It's a fourth level. But on the other hand, this level includes all of the others. So it's really 4 times as much. Now we can understand the Kasiv, what it is written, Mimana Afar Yaakov, who can count the dirt of Yaakov, Umispar ben Israel, and the number of the Jewish people. That's what another thing that Bilam said. Who can count the dirt? What does it mean, the dirt? Rashi says all the commandments that are done with dirt. We're going to learn that today in the Chumash class. All the blessings of, especially we'll learn how the Rambam explains the Bilam's prophecy about Moshiach. We'll talk about that today. Tama shekatav mispar. That goes on mimana. Who can count the number? This refers to counting. She'ein mispar, there is no number. The afal pikein umispar kativ. It's written that there is a number. Mashma sheyesh mispar. Ella what? She'ein is like this. Who can count the number of the Jewish people that's like the dirt, and there is no number. So is there a number or is there not a number? So it's like we said before, that the Jewish people, they are in the category of number because each one is separate. But nevertheless, it's not really a number. It's like the ark, we said, that it's not really a number, because they draw down the upper will of God, which shows Rebbe Yisrael. They draw down this fourth level, which shows that the world is really not a world at all. It's really just a huge, amazing miracle, and all there really is the oneness of God. Okay, so what do we learn? The Jewish people have this ability to combine what we call the infinite and the finite together with a higher level, because really these 4 levels, these 3, they're all infinite. This physical world, it has, theoretically, you could go to some sort of what do they call it? A person who's good at statistics or however it works, and he could probably estimate how many bugs there are and how many grains of sand there are, how many atoms there are in the world. You could probably make some sort of a good estimation, how much there is, how much space there is, and this. So the world is, so to speak, a limited place. But the world which is right above ours, that's the world of Asiya. But then it says that there's even really the world of Asiya is divided into 2. It says that there's the spiritual level of Asiya. And that's where all these spiritual powers, like from the East and the meditations, they get to. That's the spirit. But then above that, above the spiritual part of Asiya, then there's the world of Yetzirah. We said that's like God's speech. Well, that's infinite. It's infinitely great. That's when a person dies. He goes up to the world of if his soul goes up to, everybody's going berserk. They're crazy. What happened to Uncle Joe? Right? He's gone. They're putting his body in the ground. Where's Uncle Joe? Who would ever put a person's body in the ground? You can't do that. No, you don't understand. Uncle Joe is dead. Well, where is he? Where is he? He's dead. He went to heaven. I don't know where he is. He's dead. So he's like, everybody's going wild. Uncle Joe, wow, a fellow of infinite jest. We used to like him. He was so nice, and now where'd he go? It's like he went to a place that's just infinite. He can't figure out where it is in heaven. It says that level of Yetzirah is infinitely more real than this physical world. Infinitely. But the world of Bria is infinitely more real than the world of Yetzirah. In other words, the world of God's thought is infinitely greater than the level of Yetzirah. But true, they're infinite, but they're limited to being spiritual. They're limited to being spiritual. They can't come into the physical world. Which is not that's just 3 levels: God's speech, thought, speech, and action. But this 4th level, this is, in a way, it's not even a level. We're going to see that this also is, but in a way, it's not. Why? Because it encompasses all of the 3 levels which are below it, and shows that they're just creations of God. It's like a person that has a pauper in the streets, digging from garbage cans. And you have a person that's, he's well off. He has a sort of a normal house, has $20,000 in the bank or whatever. And then you have a person that's a multi-billionaire. multi-billionaire. So you can't compare. One of the person has a nice house and he's like infinitely greater than the guy's scrounging around in the streets. And the billionaire, he's infinitely greater. But then there's the king. And the king, he can take the poorest person and make him the richest. He can take the richest person and make him the poorest. The king owns everything. That's like this fourth level. And the Jewish people, when they make a commandment, so they connect to the king of the world. Every time you make a blessing, you're a king. Behold, calls all this that we're just talked about, all these levels, this is what's talking about the lower unity of God. But Ma'aseh is doing the commandments. I'm going to tell you what this lower unity is in a second. To draw down God's upper will into this level of number. The lowest level to draw godliness into the lowest level, the essence of God. But Talmud Torah, that's talking about the commandments. But learning Torah is a whole different thing. Learning Torah, can I get kulam? This is what's called the upper unity of God. That's what Bilam said. Who can count the dirt of Jacob? The offer eino begetter mispar kalal. Dirt, you can't count it at all. Dirt is just, it's all clumps of dirt. You can't count how many clumps of dirt are there. What does it mean? I mean, it's all like sort of unified together. Sand, each one is separate. But you go dirt in your background, how much dirt is there? Like maybe you can measure how many pounds of dirt. No, I want to know how many grains of dirt. And there's no grains of dirt. What do you mean? Come on, what are you talking about? Everything is made of grains. There's atoms, make up everything. Everything is grains. Now tell me how many grains of dirt there are. There's no grains. It's just, maybe you could grind it up, separate it somehow or other, dry it out, make it into sand. But dirt is all hu bechinas Talmud Torah. The dirt, that is a metaphor for learning the Torah. Lafishu ratzona, because the Torah, this is really God's will. But the Torah is the source of the commandments. Right? How do we know what to do? Because of the Torah. That's why the people who always wanted to destroy Judaism, what do they try to do? They tried to say that the Torah is not talking about commandments. Every word of the Torah is true. Every word is true, but it's not talking about commandments. This is destroying Judaism. This is destroying the world. It's destroying all. But on the other hand, the Torah is true. Even if you don't think about any commandments, you just sit and learn the Torah. The Torah is the word of God. The Torah is not just an instruction book to tell us to do something more important, right? Like you have an instruction book, how to use your new mix master. The instruction book. The most important thing is the mix master, right? An instruction book, yeah, you can figure it out yourself how to use the mix master. But that's not the Torah. The Torah is more real than the commandments. The Torah, first of all, itself is a commandment. The Torah is the will of God, the will of God. And the commandments, that's just expressing this will. That's the outcome. And therefore, the Torah is what's called the upper unity of God. This is you putting our intellect into God's intellect. It says that the Mishnah is the king. Okay, so again, what's really going on over here? The commandments, it says that's God's action. We want to do what God wants. So that links up our body with God, links up the world with God. It brings God into the world, physical world. But what's the essence of all this? The essence of all this comes from the Torah. The Torah, this is God's wisdom and God's will, right? In exact form. This is exactly what God is thinking, exactly God's will. That's what the Torah is. That's why in the Holy Temple, there were two aspects of the Holy Temple. There were all the commandments. There was the outer altar and the inner altar and the candelabra, the menorah and the bread, all the commandments that they did. And then, but in the Holy of Holies, there was the Torah. The Torah is the whole. All the others were outside. The Holy of Holies, that was the Torah. That was the tablets. So therefore, when a Jew learns the Torah, is the Torah is also learning. The Torah is also a commandment, but it's a commandment not like any other, because you have to use your mind. And this is unifying not just your body with the Creator, but it's unifying your mind. It's the Holy of Holies, the Torah. The Eino Begetter Mispar Kalal, the Torah, that cannot be counted at all. That's totally infinite, etc., etc., etc. From this, we can understand why the Torah is called Afar. It's called dirt. She'eno begetter mispar. You can't count it. Shu gush echad. It's like one clump. Shaloche, and therefore, kol osik b'Torah, a person who learns the laws of the sacrifices, ke'ilu hikriv ola. It's like he's made a sacrifice. Av she'osik be'idna, even though he's learning Torah in a time when there is no sacrifices, in the nighttime, he's learning Torah, for instance, in the nighttime, where he's learning Torah right now when there's no holy temple. Nevertheless, it's as though he does the command, because the Torah is above time and it's above place. Masha'enki become mitzvahs, which is not the commands, but the commandments themselves, that they are divided into time. Poloni, eight lakol chayfetz, it says that each one has its time, right? If you eat matzah on any other day except for Passover, you're not doing a commandment. Right? If you put tefillin on in the nighttime, you're not technically doing the commandment. Right? You put a mezuzah on your leg, so you're not doing a commandment. You have to have a house, it has to be your house. So the commandments are very limited to time and space, but the Torah is not limited at all. Not the time and not the space. Because the Torah is what's called the will of all wills. Like it says, the commandments are the will of God, expressing the will of God, but the source of this will is the Torah. The Torah, like we said, is also a commandment, but the Torah itself is pure will of God. It's telling you it's the source of all the commandments. That, like it's in the Mimer. But that's what it says. That's what it says. Make us holy with your commandments, but make our portion in your Torah, that by means of the commandments, we are holy. Kedushin. Now we're saying there's two steps in getting married. First of all, is getting engaged, and then there's getting married. The engagement is almost the same thing as getting married. It's almost the same thing. It used to be a long time ago that a man would get engaged to a woman. It's called Irusin. Kedushin is called Irusin. Irusin means that a man he singles this woman out for him. She has to get, if he wants to break off the engagement, so he has to write a bill of divorce. We don't do that anymore. Nowadays, we make the Irusin and the Kedushin together under the wedding canopy, under the chuppah. We make it together, because it used to be that a person would get engaged and there was so much trouble in the world that the husband and wife would get separated and they wouldn't know where each other was. So it says the commandments, asher kidishanu b'mitzvot, that's just the pre-wedding arrangements, agreement. The commandments that singles us out for God, but we're not unified with God. The by means of the Torah, this is the bechinas hamshach, bechinas penimius. That's what's called yodea, knowing God. This is the consummation of the wedding. Ef shalom, we can say ki im yot she'al yidam mitzvos, that by means of the commandments we draw down the upper will of God in a person's soul, and this level of tremendous love. I said ri'uta deliba. But ki gam baratzon elyon yish gam ken bechinas chitzonis b'pinomis. Let's say it a different way, that in God's upper will, there's what's called external and internal. Like it's written in another place, etc., etc., etc. Kach also the revelation of this love of God in the soul. Before we talked about it also being joy. There's two levels. One of them is, like we said, Am Kashe Orafu. We talked about before this love of God, which is totally above any understanding. And it arouses this level which is above all this, even the spiritual worlds, that a Jew is just totally above any sort of reasoning connected to God. That's what we said. They're stiff-necked people. They'll do what God's will, they'll do what God wants, even if it means that they'll lose everything. Stiff-necked. This is drawn down by the means of the commandments. But there's something higher than that. What's higher? Higher is, the second one is like it says, how beautiful is the love of, this is in the Song of Songs, is the love of delights. This is drawing down the level of ahava b'tanugim, this love of delights. This comes from the inner will of God. And this is by means of the Torah. So the commandments, that connects us with the outer essence of God. And that means we're willing to give our lives for God and no problem whatsoever. And that we're happy and it's a wonderful thing to do the commandments. And we see the world as a big miracle, etc. But then there's a deeper level in that. If you could imagine anything deeper, it says there's something that's by means of the Torah. And the Torah says we touch on the inner pleasure of God. Like it says, V'sha'ishuyat b'nei Adam, v'zeu chachmat Adam ta'ir panav. That's what it means, that the wisdom of man illuminates his face. What does it mean? Panav, the word panav means face, but it also means panav means the inside. Haynu b'chinas panim is the inside. Achbar haderech sheyizke Adam la'ora Torah. How are we going to get to this? All these things are explained to us very nicely, but how are we going to get to this level? Well, we said the commandments, you just have to do the commandments and think about what they are. The Torah is much higher though. How do we get to that? Says, how do we get to this, what's called the upper unity of God? This is by means of Yaakov. Mimana offer Yaakov. So we said that the dirt, that's the level of the Torah. That's one clump. It's all unified. This is a higher level than the commandments. The commandments are like sand, we said. It says this is called the dirt of Jacob. Dirt is not a nice word, but we're talking about the ground. So this is, it says the ground, the dirt of Jacob. Jacob is the aspect of mercy. It says Abraham is love, Yitzchak is fear, and Jacob is mercy. To arouse great mercy on your soul. When you do the commandments, you're supposed to think about how wonderful it is. Now you're creating your partner with God, creating the world, and you're bringing godliness into the world. And you're making the world a meaningful place. That's an amazing miracle that we can do a thing like that. It says the Rebbe, there's a higher level, but it can only be given. It can only be attained as a free gift. You have to ask God for mercy. Learn Torah and say, God, please open up my eyes. Like it says, in the middle of the night. That's the prayer. There's a prayer in Judaism. I don't know if you people know about it, but there's a prayer which is called Tikkun Chatzot. Tikkun Chatzot. It's called the midnight, what do you call it? The midnight correction. I don't know. The Midnight Express. It's a bad, because there's no counterpart in English. A tikkun. The tikkun means this is the midnight fixing up. You get fixed up in the midnight. Tikkun means to fix things up. What do you mean you fix things up at midnight? What is it? So it's a series of prayers. Most is just psalms, begging God to have mercy on us. Please, God, have mercy. See what's going on in the world. Have mercy. There is an order of prayer. There's certain sentences which are talking about how great God is and how awesome God is, and that aspires in us awe and fear. Then there's how good God is. That's love. And then there's sentences which talk about mercy. Sentence, Rachem na'aleinu b'sein b'libeinu. Va'az then, hu eit ratzon. This is the proper time, a special time, especially at midnight, to arouse mercy on your soul. And this is the aspect of Yaakov, Jacob, Yud Ekev, Shunyan Rachamanis. This is the idea of mercy. God, please have mercy on us. Al Bechinas Yud, on the upper wisdom of God, which fell down into the world. The Yaakov is also Yud, that's the first letter of God's name also. And Akib means the heels, the bottom of your heels. Have mercy on us, God, that the essence of your being, God, the Jewish people, that they're the ones that they can do the commandments and learn the Torah. Look where they are. Have mercy. And forget about look where they are. Look where I am. Look where I am. Here I'm doing Torah of commandments. Right? I'm really thinking about you. I'm connected to you. I'm really happy to do the commandments. I have this great love. I have this great love. Because I'm also stuck in this quicksand of the world. Have mercy. Yaakov. Now this thing of having mercy, this you do like 5 minutes in the nighttime. What is 10 minutes in the night? This is not a thing where you walk around all the time with your head down and feeling miserable. You never say hello to anybody, right? You're just always casting a spirit of gloom wherever you go. So everyone will say, "Oh, this man is religious. Look at this." That's not the point. This, first of all, this whole idea of asking mercy and feeling heartbroken, you're supposed to do this alone. This is not a thing for you do in public or with other people. You go alone yourself. It's just between you and God. And this arouses what's called the aspect of Jacob, Yaakov. That Yaakov, we talked about this before, he's the center bolt, this bolt that held all of the boards together in the tabernacle. There was one central bolt that went through the middle of all of these boards. The boards had like this hole in the center, and the holes corresponded to one another. You could push a bolt all the way through one side. Some people say that it even turned the corners. Nevertheless, that's Yaakov. He's the central pillar. Mercy, that's the bolt that goes from one end to the other, from the highest levels down to the lowest levels, there can be. Lahakim ba'ofer dal, to lift up the poor person from the dirt. To the level of Yechudi Eloah, to this upper level, upper unity of God. Kamosh Ketub, like it's written in another place. And there's also another meaning of this afar, of the Jewish people, like the ground, like the dirt. We say, nafshi ka'afar l'chaltiya, my soul should be like dirt to everyone. And by means of that, this is what we say after the Shemona Esrei prayer. Open my heart to your Torah. By means of our casting ourselves down and considering yourself like you're nothing and just asking mercy, as that opens up your heart. We say this every day. Therefore, learning the Torah is the main thing. Learning the Torah is even higher than doing the commandments. You have to do both, but you have to know, says the Rebbe, and that's also not enough. It's just a little bit. It says, rabbis say that anyone who just learns Torah alone, and he says, all I have is the Torah, is that he doesn't have even the Torah. Torah alone is, you're fooling yourself. All I have is the Torah and pure Torah. So what more is that? We said we have the commandments, we have the Torah. What are you supposed to do? Has to be Torah with Gemilas Chasadim. You have to give charity. And this is where we're going to start off, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's do the Sikha of the Rebbe from 1951. First Sikha that the Rebbe made on Yud Beis Tammuz. Let's